introduction, this Thursday, September 9th, Shankavy Paramanathan, one of our students at University of Toronto, will give a speech entitled The Life of a Story, taking a deeper look into the origins of our childhood stories and where storytelling is headed. Shankavy is excited to express her interest in stories of all forms and would love to hear your stories and experiences. You're never going to kill storytelling because it's built into the human plan. We come with it. By Margaret Atwood. A quote by Margaret Atwood. So with the speech entitled The Life of a Story, please help me welcome one of our very own volunteers, Shankavy.
Thank you so much. I have a presentation, so I'll just quickly share that. Okay. So hello, everybody. It's so nice to see all of you. So like when I was thinking of what I should present about, I was thinking that stories is something that really connects all of us together and like helps us bond together. So like I can always remember listening to my family members telling me how like the stories of how their day went or like my parents' flashbacks to how good their days, old times were when they were kids in their hometown. So when I was growing up, I was a really big fan of like fiction novels. They're a type of story, but not really nonfiction. So I can always like remember my mother like negotiating with me at the library, telling me that if I was to take out two fiction novels, I had to take out at least one nonfiction novel. And on the other hand, like I can remember countless hours spent in front of the TV watching movies and shows and animated characters and live action films with exciting, adventurous plot twists. So I just loved stories. And I think that's something that all of us have in common. So if we were to look at the surface level of what storytelling is, we can see the definition that it is the act of telling or writing stories or narratives. And they're typically stories that are told for entertainment, informational purposes, or educational purposes. So anthropologists mentioned that storytelling is something that's considered as a universal experience to humankind. And although it's hard to prove, there's history that shows that storytelling sort of developed around the time that language was also developed. It's a fact that almost all cultures have some kind of storytelling, and earliest evidence comes from cave drawings, for example, the Chauveau cave in France. And cave drawings go back around 30,000 years that show humans, animals, and like their lifestyles. And some of these represent visual stories and have a possibility of depicting the oral stories that were once told. And these stories of like the oral stories are one of the most traditional forms through gestures and voice. And these also vary throughout cultures in the form of epic poems, chants, rhymes, songs, and they discuss legends and religion and prayers as most of us know now. So I'll move on to the next slide. So there's so many cultures and traditional ways of storytelling and types of stories, but it's going to take me hours to go through all of them. So I just chose two that were exceptionally interesting to me. And I'm going to apologize beforehand because I might mispronounce the names of the tales and the cultures. So I'll try my best. So this is a Chauveau cave in the mountains of southern France. And it is extremely like well preserved. And this is one of the caves that go back 30,000 years. So the walls of the caves have paintings of like prehistoric depictions. So this was a form of unspoken and unwritten language to communicate. You can see that there's like mammoths and lions and rhinos in the picture. And they depict like the people's daily activities, their homemade weapons, and how they use every piece of the animal to survive. I really found this interesting, and a cool fact that I recently found was that you can see how there's multiple like phases of one of the animals, and scientists have found that if you shine a fire in front of these images and like move them around, it actually makes this optical motion sort of, so it's like moving pictures, which is really cool for like that technology way back then. And another example is the Epic of Gilgamesh. So this story was, this started as an epic poem by the Sumerian king in the 3rd millennium, so BC. This story was about a man named Gilgamesh and a wild man named Enkidu, who befriends Gilgamesh after a fight. So the main key of the story was about immorality, and these epic poems could take like 500 pages by today's standards, but the Greeks were so passionate about the art of oral storytelling, so they made sure that they were written in poems to help storytellers remember the story, but also made it a very artistic way of performing the story. So I found this cool infographic that sort of sums up the history of stories pretty well. So there's a few of the stories that I mentioned on here. So over the next few centuries, several art forms of writing and pictures came to be. So not long after, there was the Shakespearean era, and after that, there was fairy tales that started in France, and many fairy tales from this point in time were stories that were passed down from generations before. So they were usually also oral stories that were later written down and put to paper. So these stories were mainly for children, and they were created to teach children the basic life lessons in storytelling form. Most of us know the story of Hansel and Gretel. So this was meant to scare children from wandering off into the woods. And these types of stories are like the main inspiration for what we know as Disney films and childhood books. And later in the 1700s, newspapers shook the world with printed words. And they were, back then, they were just in 3 main colors: red, yellow, and blue ink, which I found was really interesting. And soon after that, there was photographs that brought back visual storytelling and publishing firms with magazines and novels. So now getting into some of the forms that we're familiar with. So in the 1940s, television broadcasting got popular, and in 1980s, music videos got popular. Music videos are a very interesting way of storytelling with music and videos. So all of these are still considered forms of storytelling. So today, of course, stories can be told orally or through printed or handwritten text, and recorded sounds and images, like I mentioned, for music videos and photographs. So storytelling is still maintained throughout all these years, and that's something we hold common between many cultures. So like when you ask yourself, why is storytelling so important? A reason could be that it feels, we feel like we can control storytelling. We can make sense of the events that happen in the world and put them in order. They express emotions and make compelling stories. And the more compelling they are, the more empathetic people are in real life. Telling children stories about princes and princesses, they all help the children feel more empathetic. And stories also share information in a memorable way. When I was a little kid, I would always remember bringing like a test material to my brother and ask him to test me on the text. And I always remembered that he would make up funny characters for the material, and it was so much easier for me to remember just because there is funny characters, and then like there's an emotional connection to the characters in the story. So in this day and age, we also have social media. And this gives us access to everyone's life without actually being there. And by just quickly looking someone up, we can see what they're up to and their story of the day. So social media has become the modern way of telling stories. And in our lives in the 21st century, it can sort of be held as like a time capsule for humankind. We can see pictures from today, or we can see pictures of grandparents and our ancestors and timeless landscapes. So in my personal opinion, I think that all the forms of storytelling will probably be kept throughout many generations even after us. However, like social media and virtual reality emerged, there are most likely newer ways to share stories that will emerge in the future. The evolution of storytelling reflects how people learn and communicate. And although there are many options for storytelling, I think each one of the different forms generate a different connection to us and different purpose of telling the stories. I still know that my baby cousin, even though she's tiny, instead of looking on social media for stories, she still pops up a physical book and runs to me for me to read the story out loud to her whenever I visit. So thank you for listening to my presentation. And now I would like to hear from you. So what is one of your favorite childhood stories? So this can be something that you've seen or you've heard from your family or friends. And what's your favorite style of storytelling? And what do you think the future of storytelling holds? Thank you.